Welcome to Public Forum, a community outreach program produced at North Idaho College on the shores of Lake Coeur d'Alene. Featuring guests from around the globe addressing a wide variety of subjects, Public Forum serves to educate and enlighten. Please join host and moderator, political scientist Tony Stewart, in welcoming today's guest.
We are very fortunate to have a very distinguished guest for the next 2 weeks, this week and again next week. I welcome to the program a very distinguished author, Andrew Carroll. He is a best-selling writer and is the author of a number of books, and his works appeared in the New York Times best-selling list, including the book War Letters, Extraordinary Correspondence from American Wars, that inspired the critically acclaimed PBS documentary War Letters, produced by American Experience. Among his other distinguished works are Grace Under Fire, Letters of Faith in Times of War, published in 2007, Operation Homecoming, Iraq, Afghanistan, and the Home Front in the Words of U.S. Troops and Their Families, 2006, and Behind the Lines, Powerful and Revealing American and Foreign War Letters, and One Man's Search to Find Them, in 2005. It's just such a pleasure to have you here, Mr. Carroll, and congratulations. You've won many awards, and certainly, as I indicated, on the New York Times bestsellers list, and we look forward to those interviews with you.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. I appreciate it.
And I'm very pleased to have two panel members today. First of all is Erna Reinhardt, who is Director of Public Relations at North Idaho College, and next to her is Dr. Virginia Tinsley Johnson, who chairs the Division of Communications, Fine Arts, and Humanities, and also is on the Humanities Council. And we want to thank the Idaho Humanities Council, because without them we wouldn't have these programs today. And they're sponsoring it, and our guest will be a banker speaker this evening. And with that, we will turn the questioning over to Erna Reinhardt.
We are delighted to have you to the show. So welcome not only to Coeur d'Alene, but welcome to the show, and it's an honor for us to have you here.
Well, thank you.
For those individuals and viewers that aren't familiar with your books and the format of your books, share with us a little bit what your books are like, what the format is like, what this is all about.
It's a very personal project for me, and the real irony of all this is I don't come from a military family. I have no military experience, and I actually grew up with no interest in history whatsoever. So it's rather strange for a lot of people who know me that this is what I'm doing with my life, because now I'm consumed by history. I love it. It's my passion. What happened was, right before Christmas of 1989, our house in Washington, D.C. burned down, and nobody was hurt, which is obviously the most important thing. Everything was wiped out. The worst part of it for me was losing our family letters. There was nothing of great historical significance. I did have a friend who was in Tiananmen Square during the crackdown in China, and he wrote home these riveting letters of what it was like to be in Beijing at that time. Most of these were letters from my parents, grandparents, and so forth. So they just had a lot of personal value, all gone in the fire. And it got me thinking about just the importance of letters and how we take them for granted. And so I started talking to people about, what do you do with your old letters? And I was shocked by how many veterans said to me, I throw mine away. And it seemed that we were losing something, not just as a country, but these families were losing something they might want to really hold on to. So really on a whim, I wrote to Dear Abby, because I knew that she was read everywhere, and she would promote certain causes in her newspaper. She's very patriotic. She is doing efforts to get people to write to the troops. This is back before, certainly before Afghanistan, Iraq, but even before the Gulf War. This is back in the 80s and 90s. And I wrote her a letter, and I said, I want to start a project to encourage Americans to save their war letters. And if they want to send a photocopy of a really special war letter, I'll archive it. So we'll kind of create this separate archive, so if heaven forbid they lose their letters the way we lost ours, someone else has a copy. And she wrote back and she said, sweetie, let's do it. So on November 11th, 1998, so obviously some time had passed. I was working on talking with people and getting the Legacy Project started. This is now almost 9 years since the fire. This column ran in newspapers across the country. And I figured, of course, we're going to get some responses. But I had no idea just the avalanche of mail that it was going to create. And in fact, the post office, 3 days after the column ran, the post office called me. And it's always a little discomforting when the post office calls you. And they said, is this Andrew Carroll? I said, yes, it is. And they said, you need to get down here now and pick up your mail. And I apologized profusely. I said, I got the smallest little post office box you have because it was the most affordable. I'm going to jump on my bike. I've got a huge backpack, and I'll be right down there. And the gentleman said, well, you might want to bring a car. There were bins and bins and bins of letters coming in from all over the country, every war in our history. And what I wasn't prepared logistically for just this onslaught of mail. but also emotionally, because along with what the letters contained, there were cover letters that came in from the veterans, from their family members, explaining why these letters were so important to them. And I'll never forget, one woman wrote to me, she said, "Dear Andy, these are the letters that my brother wrote from Vietnam that I'm enclosing. And he's missing, but not a prisoner of war." I've heard that, those stories many times of they just, the person never comes home and or their remains are ever found. She said, "No, he came home, but he was so traumatized by what he had seen, what he'd experienced, that one day he literally just walked out of our front door. We never saw him again." And she ended it with a sentiment that I would hear time and time again, regardless of the war or the family, which is, "I just want someone to remember who he was." And so it really suddenly became a very personal project, and I've gotten to know these families. We've received about 80,000 letters. It doesn't mean that 80,000 people have written to us, because we had one couple from World War II send us 2,000 letters. They wrote to each other every single day. They saved every single letter. So that's just one family sent 2,000 letters. But it has been thousands of people who've contributed these, and when we use them in the books, or we've done documentaries and radio broadcasts and so forth, I get to know the families, and to me, that's the best part of this project, getting to know these troops. I've been to Iraq, I've been to Afghanistan, meeting the veterans or their, if it's their grown children who send us the letters, and that's the way I want this project to be. That people feel that this is something that is a labor of love. We don't do it. There's no money involved. We don't buy letters. We don't sell letters. All the royalties from the books go to various projects, to veterans groups. I'm donating copies of Grace Under Fire to all military chaplains as a thank you to them for their service. So it really is something that's very special to me, and I hope other people will see it that way and feel comfortable sharing, because we're still looking. People always ask me, are you all finished now? The books are done. No, we're always looking for letters.
With that, Dr. Johnson.
A little more about the format. I know, having read War Letters, that there's a whole lot of research behind these, Tony, that you have not only the letters, but also there's the context for these letters, and they run from, the Civil War through Gulf War in this book.
In War Letters, right. It's the Civil War, actually peacekeeping efforts in Bosnia. For the paperback edition, 9/11 had just happened, and I came across an extraordinary correspondence between a Marine and a Muslim friend of his, who was actually writing him saying, "Ry, are you okay?" And it's this beautiful correspondence. And so that goes, the paperback now goes up to 9/11. Behind the Lines goes from the Revolution up to the present day Iraq and Afghanistan. So it's a much more comprehensive book, Behind the Lines, as does Grace Under Fire. War Letters and Behind the Lines and Grace Under Fire, I put enormous effort into researching who these people are, what's the context in which they're writing, what battle is it, or if they're on the home front, where is their husband or their father or whoever it might be. And I want the reader to feel that they know these people. How old are they? Where are they from? What happened to them? We have a couple who became pen pals during World War II. It was a woman who wrote a sort of a to any soldier letter, which ended up going to this Marine. And they never met, obviously. Well, they fell in love through their letters. Well, people want to know, well, what happened to them? Did they marry? Well, they did. And they ended up happily married ever after. And in fact, when he returned from the Pacific campaign, they got married 2 days after he set foot on American soil. And it was the first time they'd ever set eyes on one another. So there are these wonderful stories that come out of this as well.
Right. Tell us a little bit about the Operation Homecoming, because it's quite a different content, approach, and so forth.
Yeah, and that's a whole separate project. And I'm glad you brought it up, because it's something I've been involved with for the past 2 years. And because of my involvement with the Legacy Project, the NEA, the National Endowment for the Arts, asked me to participate in Operation Homecoming. What happened was, in April of 2004, the NEA, which is part of the executive branch of our government, sent prominent writers to military bases and said to the troops within these writing workshops, we want your stories. We want people to know your sacrifices, what you're doing, your experiences. And to be honest, when I read about this, I had that great idea, because they weren't just doing letters and emails, although that's part of it. They wanted poems, short stories, memoirs, whatever the troops were writing. I thought, it's too soon. We're in the middle of these wars. And the idea that active duty servicemen and women are going to share their most private and personal correspondences and journals and diaries with the federal government, and that you're going to have Marines writing poetry, it's not going to happen. And if it does, what really is there left to say? Because these wars have been covered more extensively than any conflicts in our history, with embedded journalists, 24-hour news, blogs, and so forth. And then finally, even if we do get great material, will the NEA allow it to be published? Because they too have to be concerned, well, if the material is too graphic, too raw, too candid, will we get some sort of feedback on this, negative? I was wrong on all counts. The troops responded with 15,000 pages of material within the year. The material was like nothing I'd ever read before. These are very intelligent young men and women, and they wrote brilliantly. And the final thing is the NEA did not in any way try and censor the book that we ended up doing of these. That's Operation Homecoming. And there was no pressure. What was wonderful is when the book came out, we all sort of held our breath, because there's enough in there to really upset people on all sides of the political spectrum. There's a lot of pride, a lot of sense of camaraderie, sense of people saying, you know, we're over here for a reason. This is our mission, whether it's Iraq or Afghanistan. And there are people saying, you know, this is more horrible than I could have imagined. I mean, we're seeing people die and civilians getting killed. Every review that came out, every single one, whether it's from on the right or the left, said this is the most balanced look at these conflicts we've ever read. And most of all, it is the utmost respect for these men and women to say to them, your voices matter the most. There's no politics in this book. It's about the people. And that's what I want all these books to do and this project to do, is to focus on the people and what they're doing for this country.
One of the things that's come out of this, I just really commend you. It's incredibly powerful, and you articulate it so well. But in your book on war letters, we're very biased to PBS. This is a PBS program, and Idaho Public Television and KSPS in Spokane are great to us, and we've been on a long, long time. And I was so delighted when you were able, through this book, to get it on. It inspired the critically acclaimed PBS documentary War Letters. Tell us how that came about, and that's another great victory out of this whole process, in addition to your publications, to get it on PBS.
Working on the film was amazing. They hired an extraordinary director, a gentleman named Robert Kenner, who took the book, and we worked on it together, picking out which pieces should we focus on. They got these amazing actors, I mean, really top-rate people to read the letters, but then they'd have footage of the wars and even some reenactments underneath. And I think they did a sensational job. And that came out in November of 2001, right after 9/11. And you all actually have been very good to us, or PBS has, because there's even a documentary based on Operation Homecoming, which just came out this spring. And it was part of the America at the Crossroads series. So I actually thought when I was in high school I was going to go into film production. Right. So on a personal level, this has been a dream come true for me. My involvement has been very minor. All the credit goes to the directors.
Well, it can't be minor because it came from your work. So.
No, well, the troops wrote it. I just sort of put it all together. I threw it together.
It couldn't happen. You're modest.
But it's. I mean, the directors, whether it's Richard with the Operation Homecoming or Robert with War Letters, did a phenomenal job, and the response to those critically was also very, very good.
As I introduced the program, you really have done wonderfully. The New York Times is a great list to be on. You had such great reaction, but people love to hear about other people and what they've gone through. I want to ask you to read a couple of your letters.
Sure.
Next week we'll do a couple more if you do that, because I know our viewers would love to hear from it.
Oh, I know, and absolutely. And I just sort of picked these at random, just quickly, because there's so many letters and so many different things to choose. For Behind the Lines, I went to 35 countries around the world, seeking out, and it was actually American veterans who inspired me to do this. They said, make this a little more inclusive. And what I love when people say, how do you pick the letters? It's very visceral for me. What is different, what's unique, what's unexpected? And I found a gentleman who's doing very much what I'm doing in the U.S. He's doing this in Great Britain. And so he's been collecting war letters. And when I was in his archives, he said, you came all the way over here. And I'm going to show you what's really special for us and different things and really give you the best of the best. And so this is one, it's so different that I really love it. It's actually a log, sort of a journal, kept by a British officer who was shot down over Germany. So here he is with his men in this German POW camp. And he's recording all the absolutely crazy things that people on the home front are writing to these men in captivity. Now, it takes a little bit of background, but you'll see what I'm getting at. So you have to imagine that you are a British officer or enlisted man in a POW camp. And these are some of the things that you're reading that are coming in from the home front. This is from a fiancé. Dear John, you were missing a month, so I got married. This is from a wife. Darling, I've just had a baby. But don't worry, the American officer will send you some cigarettes every week. This is from a male friend. I have a grandmother in Germany. Have you met her?
Oh, my.
This reads always well with my friends who are just about to get married. From a friend, I'm on my honeymoon, so like you, I'm in captivity. And my personal favorite from a former girlfriend who was apparently spending a lot of time with a service member's family back home. Darling, I've married your father. signed your new mother.
No.
And there's a serious point out of this. First of all, it's sort of the
right.
dark humor that these,
Right.
because they obviously kept these, this is their way. And actually, troops in Iraq and Afghanistan do the same thing. They have billboards where they post emails that are either rejection letters from spouses or sweethearts or whomever. Humor is how they cope. It's how they get through the stress and strain of war. But what this shows on a legitimate level is how couples are torn apart in these conflicts. And this is part of the sacrifice. It goes beyond the battlefield. So anyway, that's one thing that was a little bit unusual. What I really wanted to convey as well in these correspondences, and again, we've got 80,000 from the American Revolution up to the present day, the sense of pride that they feel and for what they do. And I really want to make sure that always comes through, because I just have so much respect for anybody in uniform, anybody who's served, and I want to make sure that voice is also part of this. So do we have time for
Yes,
this?
please.
Okay, great. This is actually by an Army officer named Christine McNeff, and she was a peacekeeper serving in Albania back in '99. And there's a little bit of humor at the beginning, but I just thought it was very poignant. It comes to the end. She's writing home to her family. I think they're in Pennsylvania. So she's serving, our troops were with a peacekeeping force. On Friday, I went out with a patrol of 82nd Airborne Infantry guys on a mission. They kind of gave me a hard time when I first showed up to go out, saying that Congress wouldn't allow them to take a woman on a combat patrol. I told them to stuff it. It was good to get outside the wire and see what this country is all about. First of all, it's an amazingly beautiful place, with mountains similar to those in Arizona, but green and lush. Unfortunately, this place is dirt poor, much worse than Bosnia. As we drove through a village, we asked around and finally found the village elder, school teacher, doctor/mayor. He was a distinguished older man with impressive charisma. He spoke of his appreciation for the United States ever since World War II, and his eyes teared up when he spoke. For the first time, I felt the impact of our presence here. It makes me all the more grateful for what I have and all the more humble for all that I take for granted. Please pray for the victims over here, because they are much more our brothers and our sisters than I think we know. What I love about this is not just her pride and her service, but the humanity of this woman who, thousands of miles from home, in pretty rugged circumstances, serving as a peacekeeper, she's very aware of what these individuals are going through. And I think we don't often hear about or see the humanity of American troops as peacekeepers or in Iraq or Afghanistan, but there's so many stories like this that are out there. They're building schools and hospitals, handing out candy to children, and I think we need to be reminded of those stories more often.
I have two reactions. One is, on the nightly news, that doesn't come through.
No.
And it does in your book. Secondly, what you've already said, they are writing that with such incredible eloquence.
Yes,
The
absolutely.
use of the language is just so powerful.
And a lot of it's just stream of conscious. I mean, I've gotten to know Chris, and she just sat down, and emailed this home. It was she just, and there's more to it. Those are just excerpts. But it's what I love is that there is a kind of aesthetic integrity, poetic power to what these troops are writing.
Yes, thank you. Erna Reinhardt.
Andrew, on your website, there was a great little note there that really touched me. It says, these letters represent the undiscovered literature of our country, tucked away in attics, basements, and closets. So share your thoughts about that comment. And then I'm interested in knowing what kind of condition were some of these letters that you received?
Let me answer the second question first. Mostly we ask for photocopies. We don't want the families to feel they've got to give up originals. Now, we have had this extraordinary experience where people find letters. They'll move into a house, they're doing construction, and they'll discover these old Civil War correspondences in the rafters or in the ceiling beams or wherever it might be. Or we've had construction workers send in Vietnam letters they found in a dumpster. So we went through these, and we've had so many thousands of those, of originals, that we picked through, I think, about 25 or so, and they were put on exhibit at the Smithsonian in an exhibit called War Letters Lost and Found. And there's a great story behind one of those letters, which hopefully get to if we have more time. But on the other question, there's so much poetry in these letters. We have a letter by a former slave named Spotswood Rice, and he's been freed, and he's now fighting in the Union Army. And he's about to go into a part of the country where his former slave master lives, and he's going to get back his child. And he writes a letter to the wife of the slave master who prevented him from having his child come to him before. In fact, she said, you have to pay us $40 if you want your child back. And he didn't have that kind of money. Back then, that was a lot of money. And so he's writing to her. And I really can't even summarize the letter, but this is a person who has almost no education. In fact, it was punishable by death for slaves to write or to read during that time. And along with just the sense of brace yourself, because we're coming back, and I'm going to take my child, and I've got the authority and the power to do it now. You just want to root for this guy because you sense this is a parent wanting his child back. But the way he expresses himself is so intense and so beautiful in a way. There's so much eloquence. And we see that in time and time again. These troops are not thinking about that these letters are going to be published. And yet, there is a kind of magic to the literature, to the literary element of them. And I wanted people to see that also as a reminder of just how intelligent they are.
Virginia Johnson.
Oh, I just have so many wonderful questions. I mean, I know my questions are wonderful, but I have so many questions for you. But I wanted the audience to know that today Andy went to both Lake City and Coeur d'Alene high schools and had a phenomenal reception from the students, many of whom in their history classes had read these letters, and to also point that a young man wrote a play based on these letters. So that was very telling. And they asked many questions. One that I would like to follow up, and it goes into, you said these were the last books of this kind of project. Could you share with us what your next project is?
Sure, and the only reason I say these are the last of the books, I feel like I've covered all the different aspects that I want to. It's not to say the project is over.
Okay.
I did not start the project to do the books. In fact, it's the opposite. I use the books to help promote the project. So in a way, I feel that they've done their duty. And I don't want people thinking this is a factory, that I'm just churning out one book after another. But as long as I'm alive, the legacy project, which is this effort to preserve these letters, will be ongoing. Now I forgot the question. Next book, right, of course. Well, there are a couple, but the one that particularly interests me, and I mentioned, and I have to say how much I loved visiting with these students. There was so much energy. They asked amazing questions. And I really love the experience, and I hope I have the chance to talk with more high school students as I do this project. I want to do a book on the hidden history of America, and it's very much related to this issue of finding these lost letters. And in fact, there are others that we'll talk about next week, because we've got some really amazing discoveries, even by famous people, letters that have been lost over time and that we discovered back before they were famous, but just young privates or lieutenants.